Okay, with that, it's 2 after, so let's get started. If you want to take it away, Vince.
Thanks, Daniel. Hello, my name is Vince Scarlata. Today we're going to be going over navigating Google Analytics 4, the shortcomings, challenges, and solutions. We know that everything is getting pretty close now to the July cutoff, so we want to go over some of the items here that you might not be thinking of and or might run into along the way too. First off, who am I? I am a digital marketer, analytics engineer, and analyst. I have been working within the field for 24 years, from the back end to the front end, all the way through. And also, I like data. So first of all, let's go over the idea of Google Analytics 4. I know that some people here might not have a full understanding of the changes, so we're just going to go through those really fast. Basically, the brief overview of Analytics 4 is the fact that in July of 2019, Google moved over to an app plus web version of Google Analytics. This was the underpinnings of what is now GA4, basically moving the idea of just a web property to a app and web property, so we can actually look at the way that users actually move from one device to another. In October of 2020, finally, they moved everything to GA4. So instead of a 3.5 release, it is now GA4. March of 2022, they released the idea that everything will shut down July of this year. It's pretty aggressive, but now as you go into analytics, you will see a message that says this property will stop processing data starting July 1st, 2023. You won't lose that data, but it will not stop. It will stop actually bringing in data from your UA sites, or sorry, your Google Analytics 3 sites. And then the key change here is the fact that the way that we're sending data to Google Analytics 3 is no longer very specific. It's actually moved to all events, which actually opens up the possibility of a lot of features, but also is a very large departure from GA3. So there's some of the items here that you'll see in a bit that are going to come up because of that. So the importance of understanding GA4 limitations is that as we move forward towards July, we actually still have a handful of limitations that are on play. And basically, we have to either work around or develop new techniques around these for right now. Will Google Analytics fix some of the issues that we go over today? Possibly, but a lot of them are because of the fact that GA4 is so drastically different from GA3. There's just no way to actually move forward with the way that we're doing everything in GA3 now. The other thing is that we might have to rely on third parties or new implementations to customize the actual install itself. So there's some limitations here that just cannot actually move over from GA3 to GA4 easily, and so we'll have to use those third parties. So the first items that we're going to go over is actually data processing limitations. The first one is data latency within GA4. So one of the things that Google Analytics came out with, or at least spotted, that when we move to GA4, you'd actually have faster times in terms of the way that data comes in and processes that data, and then you can actually view it. But to me, and from the clients that I have worked with, it's not been the case. We've actually had multiple clients that had a 15 to 18 hour delay within that data. Google does, if you see on the right, they do say that your interval of the actual data freshness should be up to 24 plus hours, 24 to 48, they say. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at data. If you're looking at data for today, you might actually have to wait until the same time tomorrow or a little bit later, up to 48 hours for that data to fully transfer into the actual property. The other way of getting that data is the real-time reports within GA4, but that only holds about 30 minutes worth of data. So therefore, you're going to have a little overlap where you're going to have to wait for that data to come in. And then we have data that's going out of GA3, and we still want that data. Also within GA4, there's exports too, and there's some limitations revolving those two. One is you can't actually take GA3 data and import it to GA4. So they're going to have two properties no matter what. Theoretically, you could actually take all the data from GA3, export it, run it through some processing, and try to translate it to GA4 events. But like I said before, because of the underpinnings of the way that GA3 works versus GA4, it's not really going to be easy to do so, nor is it really worthwhile to do so, because you can just export that data and put it into a more agnostic database that won't actually have those limitations also. So the GA3 front end only allows for the export of a small amount of data at a time too. So if you're doing everything manually and you're hitting up each one of those reports and exporting them, it's going to take a long time to actually export all of that data. For the GA4 side of it, BigQuery export has a limit of 1 million events per day. So BigQuery meaning it's a database basically that hooks up to Google Analytics that allows you to export your data. They do actually have a limit of 1 million events per day. Most sites are not going to reach that, but if you're a larger site with a lot of traffic, it might be the fact that you might actually hit that. And then third-party tools are needed to avoid API issues. So Google Analytics 4 versus 3 actually had a lot of API underpinnings in terms of the way to pull that data, but most people were not going to actually use that. But with GA4, it's more of a database situation where all your data comes in, and we do have a lot of ways to look at that data, but it might be more beneficial for you to actually go out and use an API to grab that data, right? So third-party tools might be needed to grab whatever data you're actually looking for. So the solutions and workarounds to those items, like I said before, GA3 and GA4 have entirely different data models, so there's really no solution to the fact of pulling in information from GA3. If you don't want to go the manual route, you can to export your data from GA3, you could actually go into Google Sheets. There is a plugin for Google Sheets that allows you to pull a lot of that data in a more automated fashion, especially within Sheets. There's a lot of automation you can do to actually pull a lot of that data out. And then basically the workaround for a lot of the other data in terms of trying to pass it over to another system is actually collecting less data or upgrading to GA360. So GA360 is the paid version of Google Analytics. I think it starts at around $50,000 a year for that. So a lot of people won't actually be able to afford it, but it does actually erase a lot of the problems that we have within the free version because of the fact that we can actually pull in more data and actually get a fresher set of data too at the same time. The next set of problems that we're going to run into is reporting limitations. And the first one that everyone's going to see when they go into GA4 is the fact that we have a lack of default reports. GA4 reports aren't really comparable to GA3 reports, and that's why you don't see a lot of them being moved over from GA3. Not an easy task, and the way they're actually, the schema of that data is, it just does not mesh well with GA4, so they didn't bring those items over. So the default reports we do have right now does cover most of the used data and the most use cases that people will go into Google Analytics 4 for, but it's not going to be a catch-all for all the data that you want right now. So the solutions for those are going to be the customized report portion within each one of the report areas within GA4. There is a customized report option where you can actually go in and customize to your liking. It's a little bit limited, so you're not going to get exactly what you had before, but you might be able to get it to where it's a nice compromise. The other idea is to export your data to a third-party tool like Looker Studio or Domo. That allows you to actually move the data from one area to another and then actually work with it in a more, like I said before, agnostic database situation where you can actually pull all that data in along with a lot of other third-party data too. A lot of the information I'm going to put out today is going to refer to a Looker Studio / another reporting software, just because there are so many limitations within GA4 in terms of the way that we display that data and how we're used to displaying the data within Google Analytics 3, right? So once you move over to 4 is less of a reporting tool and more of a database tool. Then you can actually send that data off to something else to actually make something look nice and presentable, something that's reusable that you could actually send out to other people within the organization. The other item that is going to be plainly obvious is the fact that there is actually no views within GA4. So they moved out the filtering function within GA4 so that we're actually using two other methods, and we'll go over that in a second. And so we're using the data filters and or not triggering the actual tag itself, right? So we're moving over to not sending that data, and that's how you actually filter out that data, or we're actually using data filters within GA4. They're just a bit limited, right? There's only two of them that you could actually do. And then basically you could actually use then the explorations portion to build segments of users, and then the front end to build audiences. So as I just mentioned, the three solutions for this are going to be data filters, segmentation, and audiences. The data filters are items that you can create in the back end of Google Analytics 4, and that'll be for IP addresses, et cetera. And those are actually not as functional as the GA3 ones. The segmentation audiences, segmentation is only for the exploration section within GA4. So there's going to be a front end, and then there's going to be an exploration section, which is going to allow you to actually really dig into the data. And that's where your custom reports are going to come from too. That's where you use segmentation. That's where you can create them. And then audiences is going to be for the front end and for actually hooking up to Google Ads and pulling audiences from the data you're looking at into Google Ads. You can actually go through and send ads to those specific people too. Our next thing we're going to look at is feature gaps and changes. So the first one is going to be dimensions and metrics. So GA4 has the ability to customize your dimensions, just like it was within GA3, but they don't work the same. So within Google Analytics 3, we actually had a way to attach additional data with those parameters over. But with GA4, we're actually allowed to actually add a lot more, right? So within GA3, there was a specific way of doing so. Within GA4, you have one event that comes through with multiple parameters. So it's scoped to event, user, or item, rather than before it was user, page view, et cetera. These were all scoped a lot differently. You'll only get up to 50 per event, which is actually a lot. So the way they explain it is that each event that comes over, we know that, let's say the event is a car. We know it's a car, but we want to actually add in parameters to describe what that car is, right? To give it a make, model, finish, et cetera. And so that's why those parameters are very important. And that's how you're actually going to send them versus the GA3 version, right? The last thing I want to mention is that within Google Tag Manager, these everything is referred to as parameters rather than the actual dimensions that you see within GA4. There's just a nomenclature issue there, but nonetheless, just be aware that it's going to say that differently, but you're actually sending that data correctly. And then we were going to run into some customization limitations also. So within GA3, we actually had a customization or a custom report section up on top and left that allowed you to actually create your reports based upon the schema that we previously had within GA3, right? And there's a lot of drop downs, a lot of ways to actually just put in some text to try to filter out some of that data. But we've made that extremely more complex within GA4, which is good and bad, right? Good because there's a lot more ways to actually pick out that data, look through it, and analyze it, but bad because we have to learn a whole new system that's very robust, right? So the one thing that you're going to notice is that on the left portion of the screen, when you get into explorations, you'll see on the right side of this screen here, you'll have a lot of options to deal with. So basically you just have to learn how to use that section if you're going to actually go through and create those reports. Additionally, like I said before, we can then export that data too to use someplace else. The next item that we're going to show, or that is the next couple of items that we're going to show, are about integration limitations. And so third-party tools and limitations, we have possible issues with full GA4 data import, right? So for Looker Studio, which is kind of odd only for the sheer fact that Google owns Looker Studio along with GA4, but you actually have a problem where not all of the events and elements are available to be pulled into the reports within Looker Studio. This is an API issue where not all of the items are actually being sent over. And that's because as they're working on GA4, they're just not updating those items. So we might see those come through on the front end in the future, which I actually hope, obviously on my end, that does come through. But if not, we actually have to work around that, right? We have API errors that we have to deal with. So Google's enforcing quotas more proactively than it did before. And so when you're in a Looker Studio report and you're looking at that data, or if you're in another third-party tool looking at that data and too many people are looking at it at a time, you might actually hit that quota limit a lot faster. I've heard a lot of problems revolved around this where people had reports they created for internal customers. And when people, when they sent that email out and everyone started looking at it once, they started running into a problem where people weren't actually getting that data because the API had stopped them because it was too much for that time. Once again, 360 would alleviate some of that, but for the free version, this is what you're working with for right now. And then third-party tools might not be ready for GA4 yet. There's a lot of tools that I've used in the past to hook up items from GA3 that are just not ready for GA4, or it's just too much of a hump for them to actually get over. And so because of that, they're just not going to actually move over to GA4, and they're going to move in a different direction altogether. So basically for the solutions on this one, we want to either optimize third-party reports to make fewer requests, right? So we're going to clean up those reports. So before, when they might be a little bit dirty in terms of you're pulling that data more than once, you might want to actually consolidate that and reuse those connections. We might want to use third-party processing to avoid quota issues. There's a couple of companies out there that will take your data, put it within their own database, right? So they hook up to the API, slowly pull everything out so it's not hitting it as frequently. And then you actually have a database just like BigQuery that actually has all your data. And then when you actually move it over to another area, you're working with their database. So therefore, you're not actually going to have the limitations you have if you were pulling that data from the API itself. And then BigQuery data within Looker Studio will not run into API issues because you can actually go through and you're using the BigQuery connection and not the actual GA4 connection. And I know I mentioned this before, BigQuery itself has a free hookup within the admin section of GA4 that allows you to hook up to a BigQuery database. All you have to do is create one. Most companies that are small are not going to run into an issue where they have to actually pay for this. It's going to be completely free. But if you have a lot of data and you're actually working with it a lot, then you have to actually start to actually pay for most of the use that you're going. But we have a free monthly 10 gigabyte data storage and a 1 terabyte querying limit too. So it's pretty generous in the free version that it has. The next one we're going to run into is a user interface and usability issues. Most people who have moved from GA3 to GA4 are doing so reluctantly, obviously. And then on top of it, they've had a lot of time in the past that they've used GA3. So moving into GA4 is just almost a whole different beast altogether. So the first one you're going to look at is the actual navigation layout. So some reports might still come back in, right? Recently, they actually had the report for e-commerce funnels come back into the actual play. And so that's actually within GA4 now where it wasn't before. So as we move towards July, most likely we will go through and see more of these come in. But if we can't, we're just gonna have to work around those, right? You can build custom navigation to fit your needs by using the library icon in the bottom in the admin section. And then each report has a customized report feature, like I mentioned before, allowing you to customize to, where you could actually use that portion of the report. And then obviously the steep learning curve, right? It's such a different beast than GA3. Most users will need to learn about all new features, but we can actually help train your employees. If that's an option for you, let us know. We could definitely help you. We usually go through the front end, the back end, and then the explorations portion too, just to explain, what you're seeing, how it differs from GA3, and actually how we move forward. There's 2 links here that I added in also that should be in the chat. And one is the Optimized Smart category for GA4. These are blog posts that are all GA4 related, and it's a really good knowledge base. And then also within Analytics Mania, there's a Analytics 4 tutorial for those that are starting from scratch and want to get the full report of what's different between 3 and 4 and actually how to proceed. Lastly, with ChatGPT, it now actually has the ability to go out and research by itself too. So if you ask ChatGPT some of your questions, you're going to get some answers that are actually up to date too. So if anything else fails, ask ChatGPT. And or within GA4, there is a box in the top that will most likely have more AI coming. Right now, there's AI within it where you can actually just type in a regular query, or that is your regular question in normal English, and it'll give you a nice little portion of information that comes out. With everything moving to AI, we're going to actually move closer to just putting in regular questions and it actually reporting for you, right? So ChatGPT now, most likely in GA4 later. And the last portion is going to be privacy and compliance. So basically, data retention has been reduced from GA3. All this happened because of the fact that we do actually have an issue with GA4 reporting with all the outside pressure for privacy. So what Google has done is knock down data retention to 14 months. Aggregate reports, meaning that you have the amount of users, etc. So these large numbers, those will have a longer lifespan. But if you're looking for user-specific information, that will only last about 14 months. The solution to that, export your data, right? Hook up that data or the BigQuery connection, and then send that data out or send it out to another third party or at least another database too. Aggressive private information compliance, right? So personal identifiable information, that's the PII that's in there, is a big issue with Google because they are very scared about the fact that there's a lot of PII on their systems in their databases that they don't want to get sued, et cetera, right? So GDPR, CCPA, other data protection regulations, they really force them to really focus on this because they're getting sued. And so it's become more aggressive with monitoring properties that have PII. So if you do have PII that shows up, I suggest monitoring at least monthly. Make a request to delete that data because otherwise Google might shut down your account. Additionally, a better way of actually not getting that data is to actually add JavaScript within Tag Manager or on page to look for data within URLs and other items that we're sending over. And if it sees it, to redact that information, right? So you'd actually not actually have that within your database. And then those are the main issues that you're going to run into. Like I said, as we move forward into July, it's going to be, I think, a little more of a question of, are they going to bolster that system? I think they're pretty much done for now. Within GA360, I know they're adding everything, but all that, the paid version really is more, it is frequently updated way more than the actual free version. And because of that, you'll see a lot of changes there, but probably not any change within GA3. So how can we actually help you with this transition and what to do next within GA4? We're your GA4 partner. So we can set up tagging and goals for seamless data collection. We can conduct a comprehensive data audit, build data streams, all the items that you need to move that data over to GA4, we can do for you. We also do training. So basically, if you have someone within your organization that was using GA3, now needs to use GA4 to really get you that information, we can actually train those people to go through and move forward within GA4. This includes an introduction to the new front end, to new reports, etc. We're going to go through everything and explain everything nice and slow to you. And we're here if you have any questions too. And then if you don't have those people within your organization and you just need a partner to actually go through and create those audits, create those reports, do that stuff on a monthly basis to a quarterly basis that you just don't have someone on staff to do, rely on us. We can actually do all those for you. This is ongoing reporting, Looker Studio dashboards, GA4 training, etc. All these things are possible if you just want to contact us. So that's basically what we're looking at. We're going to open up everything to Q&A for right now and see if there's anyone else that has any questions.
Okay, yes, I'm seeing some come in. So first question, can GA4 be configured to not use a persistent identifier? We want our website for kids to be COPPA compliant, but COPPA considers, or COPPA considers a persistent identifier to be a tracking violation.
That is going to be a question for your internal lawyers, right? Only for the sheer fact that I can't give any information that is that specific, right? What I can tell you is that the identifiers that Google Analytics 4 gives you by default are obfuscated just numbers, right? So my assumption would be the fact that within GA4, those numbers really can't actually identify people. The problem you run into is if you have the less people you have on your website, the more you can actually identify those people, right? If you only have 5 people and you look at 5 users, you can kind of infer who that person is if you know them, right? Otherwise, everything is pretty much obfuscated enough where you really can't see that. And they've worked within GA4 to knock out a lot of the issues that we had within the cookies themselves, being able to identify you too across anything too. So I think it's pretty safe, but like I said, only for the fact that I can't give legal data, I would still go back to your lawyers and make sure.
Okay, thanks, Vince. So next question, why is my traffic data so different in GA4?
So the way that that works is the fact that within GA3, we actually looked through and said that users reacted one way / a user, an active user on your site was one thing. And with GA4, it's something completely differently, right? So in Universal Analytics, what you had was you had a different method of capturing the traffic. And what used to be understood as the number of people that visited the website now is the number of people that have actually engaged with your website and has been there for the last week or so, right? And so the way that we see that data change is the fact that within Google Analytics 4, we want to look at everything in terms of engagement versus bounce rate and a negative idea of how people are not using your site or not using a different area too. So that's one reason. Another reason is the way altogether that we're sending that data. And in addition to that too, is that some ad blockers might block GA4 versus GA3. That's where some of the machine learning that's within GA4 takes over and kind of plots out those points that you're missing because of those ad blockers. Also, on top of that, what you can do, and this is a little more tech savvy, but you can actually go through and create a server-side container for Google Tag Manager to actually send that data out to GA and not use its own underpinnings. So it can actually be blocked. So if you're seeing a lot of data being missed, it might be the fact that you can go in and actually try to get some of that data back by preventing a blocker from blocking that too. Just be aware that everything does, or every site does need a consent. And you have to abide by that consent too. If they don't accept it, you don't send that data out.
Okay, thank you, Vince. Next question. Would you be able to speak more on the GA4 training that Adage offers?
Sure. The GA4 training that we do here is comprised of 2 meetings to start with, one for the front end of GA4, one for the back end of GA4. The front end version is going to go through everything in terms of the new navigation, the new reports, how to actually go through, like I said, within the presentation previously, how to go through and change that navigation to, and actually how to read those items and work with that data on the front end. The next session that we have is all through the back end, going through the admin section, explaining each one of those admin issues or the admin areas. And then on top of that, we move over to the explorations. And so sometimes we need a third or fourth meeting to go over those explorations and explain how to actually use those for those new customer reports, like I mentioned also within the presentation.
Okay, and then follow up with that is, are those meetings charged per person or just a set price with as many applicable team members as needed?
I believe that's a set price to as many team members as needed.
And then I have someone who's asked, I'm not fully sure on the question. For whoever responded, does Adage offer GTM webinars? If you don't mind responding into a question, do you mean GoToMeeting webinars? No. Google Tag Manager webinars.
There you go. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. And so we do offer Google Tag Manager training. We don't have any webinars already set up for that, but that's something we can actually provide in the future also.
Okay. And then someone asking for a cost range for GA4 consulting.
That's going to be on a client per client basis, I think, because some actually have agreements that are different than other clients too. So it's really going to be something that's based upon you talking to your project manager, account manager.
Okay. Any other last questions? I don't see any at this time. Vince, I believe you have contact information.
Yes. So if you need more information, you can go to our analytics page on Adage. For questions, you can, or to get started on your GA4 transition itself, you can go to our contact page also, send us a contact form, or that is send us a message through our contact form, and we'll get back to you. Or also you can actually talk to your project manager, account manager, etc., and just ask them and they'll get that information to the right person.
Awesome, thanks. And we actually, when one last question came in about whether or not we need to be an Adage customer to take advantage of the GA4 training.
The GA4 training is through Adage. You don't have to be a customer. We can exactly just go through. All we really need for that training is access to your analytics. So as we go through and train, we're using your data, right? We could actually use a third-party data too. Google does actually have a property that's just for testing too, so we can use that. But we appreciate actually having access to your GA so we can run you through everything and make sure that everything's working in the back end too. But no, you don't have to be a customer. That is a website that's developed by us, but yeah, it is a paid option, right, for that training.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for attending today. Thank you, Vince, for sharing all of this knowledge on GA4. Very much appreciate it. We will be sending the on-demand version of this webinar out within the next week, so keep an eye for that if you would like to see it again. But otherwise, thank you for attending. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend.
Have a good one.